He didn't ask for company, especially not a girl barely grown, heavy with child, and silent as stone. But when Wyatt found her by the sycamore, something broke in him, and something else began to heal. The birds had stopped singing. Not for the cold. It was spring now, the kind that made the earth steam where snow still clung in the hollows, but for something else. Wyatt Collins paused by the fence post, calloused fingers still wrapped around the top rail. He squinted toward the grove near the western rise, the one with the old sycamore whose branches curled like reaching arms. The horses were restless. So was he. It wasn't just the silence. It was the stillness beneath it, the kind that didn't belong on his land. He didn't saddle up, didn't grab a rifle, just walked, boots soft in the damp soil, the wide sky pressing, down with the weight of another day he'd planned to spend alone. That plan ended the moment he stepped past the first line of trees and saw her. She was there, crumpled at the base of the sycamore, half hidden by tall grass and early bloom. A girl, or young woman, he guessed, though the pale swell of her belly said she wouldn't be young much longer. Her dress was torn at the hem, shoes hanging loose, and she looked like she'd been running or walking for too long. Maybe both. Her head lolled when he knelt beside her. She wasn't asleep. She was near gone. He reached out, hesitated, then gently touched her shoulder. The reaction was instant. She flinched hard, eyes snapping open with a kind of panic he'd seen only in dying animals and war-bound men. He didn't move. "You're all right," he said, voice low, hands raised like a peace offering. "Ain't gonna hurt you." She stared, lips cracked, breath shallow. She tried to speak. Nothing came, just the faintest shake of her head. Wyatt didn't ask questions. Not yet. Not when her skin was cold and she could barely keep her eyes open. He took off his coat, eased it around her shoulders, and then without another word, lifted her into his arms. She didn't resist. Too tired, maybe, or too desperate to care. The walk back was slow. She barely weighed more than a sack of oats, but her belly shifted now and then, the life inside her still restless. Wyatt didn't look at her face. Not then. He just focused on the steady rhythm of his boots, the soft gasp of her breath, and the feeling, unwelcome and unfamiliar, that something had just changed in a way he couldn't undo. The ranch house stood squat and weather-worn against the horizon. He'd built it himself, with his father's tools and his mother's prayers, still etched in the beams. It had room enough for one man and too much quiet for comfort. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, carried her inside, and laid her gently on the worn settee by the fire. She stirred, blinked slowly. "You need a doctor?" he asked. Her lips parted. A whisper escaped. "No." "Sure?" "No doctor." That was all she said. Then her eyes slid shut again. Wyatt didn't push. He stoked the fire, fetched a blanket, and made her drink slow sips of water between half-conscious breaths. She was fevered, but not burning. Exhausted, but not dying. At least, not yet. Hours passed. He sat by the fire, boots off, hands idle, watching, waiting. When she woke again, it was darker. The shadows on the wall stretched long and the fire cracked low. She blinked, her gaze drifting around the room like it was unfamiliar, which, of course, it was. "You hungry?" Wyatt asked. She hesitated, then nodded. He rose, ladled stew from the pot on the stove, and brought it to her in a chipped bowl. She sat up slowly, wincing as she moved, and took it with both hands. She didn't thank him, didn't speak at all, just ate like someone who hadn't had a real meal in days. When the bowl was empty, she looked up. "Where am I?" "My ranch," Wyatt said simply. "Few miles west of Coldridge. Name's Wyatt Collins." She nodded once, faint. Then, after a long silence, "I'm Clara. Just Clara. No last name offered." Wyatt didn't ask for one. "You by yourself?" he asked quietly. She tensed. Her eyes flicked to the door, then the window, then back to him. Was. Wyatt nodded. That was answer enough. He didn't sleep that night. Not really. He stayed in the chair by the fire listening to her breathing, watching the light flicker across the beams. In the middle of the night, she cried out. Soft, like she was trying not to. He rose without a word, found her twisted in the blanket, face damp with tears. It's all right, he murmured, not touching her. You're safe. Here. She didn't answer, but her breathing slowed. Morning came gray and brittle. Snowmelt dripped from the eaves. Wyatt cooked eggs, bacon, and biscuits and brought her a plate. She ate quietly, eyes distant. He let her be. By midday, she stood on her own, moved to the window, watched the wind move across the pasture. You got family? Wyatt asked, careful, not to turn it into a demand. No. The word came fast. Flat. Not anymore. He didn't ask what happened. Something in her voice made it clear he didn't want to know. Not yet. She didn't talk much, but she helped. Washed her own dishes, swept the floor without being asked, even fed the chickens. Her belly slowed her some, but she didn't complain. That night, after supper, she sat by the hearth. Her fingers rested on the curve of her belly like it was second nature. Wyatt watched from across the room, hands resting on his knees. You ain't due soon, are you? He asked. She glanced up. Couple weeks. You sure you don't want a doctor? I'm sure. He nodded again. Left it there. But later, when she'd gone to lie down in the spare room, door cracked, candle burning low, Wyatt sat at the kitchen table long after the fire died. His mind was restless in a way it hadn't been for years. She wasn't just a girl who needed help. She wasn't just carrying a child. She was carrying something else, too. Something broken and heavy, and he was starting to feel it in his own chest. He told himself he didn't need this, didn't ask for it, but that didn't matter. Not now, because Clara had come out of the woods with silence in her eyes and sorrow in her blood, and Wyatt had opened the door, and now neither of them could shut it. Clara didn't speak much in the days that followed, but Wyatt learned to read her silences. She wasn't shy. Shy was soft and hesitant. Clara was quiet like a locked door, sturdy and deliberate. She moved through the house with care, always taking up as little space as possible. She folded her blankets before sunrise, cleaned the stovetop after every meal, and never once let him lift a finger to help her carry firewood, even though her belly was now visibly heavy, taut with coming life. Wyatt watched her the way he used to watch the weather, warily, knowing that something was always brewing beneath the surface. It had been 5 days since she arrived, long enough for him to get used to the sound of a second set of footsteps in the house, long enough for the ache of old loneliness to go quiet in his bones, but not long enough for trust. Not yet. He came in from the barn just after sunset, shaking, mud from his boots when he saw her standing by the stove with her back to him. She was holding a piece of cloth, one of the old swaddles his ma had tucked away in the cedar chest years ago, still smelling faintly of lavender and smoke. She didn't know he was watching. Her head was bowed, eyes fixed on the folds of the fabric like she was somewhere else entirely. You found the chest, he said gently. She startled, just a flicker of her shoulders. Then she nodded. I was looking for towels. I didn't mean to. It's all right. He hung his coat. You can use whatever you need. Clara turned, her expression unreadable in the dim firelight. This was your mother's. Yeah. He glanced at the swaddle in her hands. She made those before my brother was born. A silence stretched between them like a drawn thread. Finally, Clara spoke again. Did he live? Wyatt looked down. Not long. She didn't press, and he didn't offer more. Instead, he stepped into the kitchen, hands resting lightly on the back of a chair. You should be resting more, he said. You're doing too much. Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. "I don't know how to sit still." "You'll have to learn." Another silence. Then, unexpectedly, she asked, "Why'd you help me?" Wyatt blinked. "What do you mean?" "I was just a stranger," she said softly. "Could have been trouble." He met her eyes. "You looked like you needed help. That was enough." Her gaze held his for a moment longer before she looked away. That's rare. Doesn't make it wrong. That night, he heard her crying again. The sound was muffled, almost strangled, but in a house that quiet, pain had no place to hide. He didn't go to her room. He just sat on the porch, listening to the wind, gripping the rail hard enough his knuckles turned white. He hated the helplessness. Hated that whatever had happened to her before she reached his ranch still had claws deep in her. But he didn't know how to reach her. Not yet. The next morning, Clara was gone. The bed was made. The dishes washed. The fires still. Warm in the hearth, but she was nowhere in the house. Wyatt checked the yard, the barn, the pasture. Nothing. His heart hammered in his chest, a sensation he hadn't felt since the day the telegram came from the War Office. Then he saw the trail. Small, faint footprints in the muddy grass leading toward the grove, the same place where he'd found her. He followed without thinking, boots sinking deep, lungs tight, and when he reached the old sycamore, he found her there again. Only now she was standing, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the tree like it held answers. "Clara," he called. She turned, startled, then looked down, ashamed. "I'm sorry." He walked closer, slow. "You all right?" She hesitated, then nodded, but it was a lie, and they both knew it. "I thought maybe I dreamed it all," she said finally, "that I'd wake up and still be there." Where? He'd threatened mercy, and Wyatt had already lost one child in his lifetime. He wouldn't lose another. Clara knew something had shifted. She saw it in the way Wyatt moved. Slower, heavier, with eyes that scanned every shadow twice. He stopped, fixing things that weren't broken, spent longer by the windows. She never asked if something had happened because the silence between them had never been hollow. It was the kind of silence that meant everything that needed saying was already understood. But still, she wondered how long they could live under. The weight of something neither of them would name. Mercy was the only one untouched by the heaviness. She smiled more now, found her fists with her mouth, and stared long at Wyatt whenever he came near. Sometimes Clara would catch Wyatt just standing over the cradle, not saying a word, not even rocking it, just looking. Not like he was trying to figure her out, but like he already had, and the knowing was both comfort and burden. Then came the fire. It started in the west field. Wyatt had just finished fencing the eastern slope, and Clara was inside sewing a blanket from old flour sacks, when the first coil of smoke caught the wind. By the time Wyatt reached the field, the dry grass was already burning in long, angry streaks. He stomped at it, beat it with his coat, shouted into the wind as if volume could smother flame. But the fire didn't care. It wasn't an accident. He knew that immediately. The fire hadn't started near the barn, or where old equipment was left out. It had started exactly where it could be seen from the house. A warning, a taunt, a line drawn in smoke. By nightfall, the field was ash. "Why? Burn it?" Clara asked as she stood beside him, Mercy pressed to her shoulder. "What do they gain?" "They're trying to scare us," Wyatt said. "Trying to get me to move you, make you run." Clara didn't respond. She looked out over the blackened earth, the smell of char still thick and sour. Then she whispered, "It won't work." Wyatt nodded. "No, it won't." The next day, he rode into town. He hadn't been back since Clara arrived. It was a small place, built more of stubbornness than anything else. 3 streets of dirt and dust, a general store with prices carved, into the wall, and a sheriff's office with a door that never shut all the way. Sheriff Tom Eddings had known Wyatt since before the war. They hadn't spoken much after, the kind of friendship that didn't require catching up, but didn't recover from silence either. When Wyatt stepped into the office, Tom looked up from his desk and just nodded once. "Knew you'd come eventually," he said. "Heard there was a woman staying at your place." Wyatt sat. "That's not why I'm here." "No? Thought maybe she'd run from something." Wyatt didn't answer. Tom leaned back in his chair. "You know folks talk, Wyatt. Girl shows up, half dead and near birthing, and suddenly you're seen fixing fences and buying milk by the gallon. Not like you. I don't care what folks say." "No, you don't," Tom said with a quiet smile. "But trouble doesn't care what you care about either. If it's coming for her, it'll come through you." Wyatt handed him the note. Tom read it, mouth pressed into a hard line. "You recognize the handwriting?" "No." "Recognize the man she might be running from?" "Not yet." Tom folded the note. "I'll ask around, but you know how it goes. A man like that, he won't leave a trail, not one we can follow. I'm not asking you to follow him." "What then?" "Just let me know if strangers start asking about a girl with a baby, or about me." Tom nodded slowly. "You planning to handle this yourself?" "I always have." Tom leaned forward, rested his elbows on the desk. "You're not alone anymore, Wyatt. That changes how you fight." Wyatt stood. "No, that changes why I fight." He left town with a bag of supplies, more ammunition, and eyes in his back. Back at the ranch, Clara was waiting on the porch. She didn't ask what he learned. She only looked at him long enough to know it wasn't good. Then she turned, opened the door, and went inside. That night, after Mercy was asleep and the fire was low, Clara sat beside Wyatt, her knees pulled. Up under her dress, eyes on the flames. "I wasn't supposed to make it," she said. Wyatt didn't look at her. He just listened. "When I ran, I wasn't thinking of surviving. I just knew I had to get away. The baby wasn't due for weeks. I figured I'd find a place to hide, deliver her, maybe, disappear. I didn't think I'd end up here." Wyatt waited. Clara took a long breath. "He was my father's friend. Came to help with the farm after Papa passed. Seemed kind, quiet, but it was all for show. When I turned 17, he started talking about marriage. Said it was what my father would have wanted. Mama was too tired to fight him, and I didn't have anyone left. So I stayed." She paused, eyes bright with old anger. "But he wasn't a husband. He was a jailer. And when I told him I was pregnant, he laughed. Said I'd finally given him something that mattered." Wyatt felt his hands clench. "I knew I had to leave. But he kept the horses locked, the money hidden. So I waited, stole a little at a time. And one night I ran. I ran until my feet bled. I didn't know where I was going, just away. I thought maybe the Lord had forgotten me." Wyatt finally turned to her. He didn't. She looked up, surprised. He nodded toward the cradle. "You're here. She's here. That's not chance. That's mercy." Clara smiled, but it trembled. "That's why I named her." They sat like that a while, both afraid to speak more, both comforted that they didn't have to. But peace, once tasted, only makes you thirstier for more. And peace never stays long. It came the next morning, not the man, just a sound. The sound of something breaking. Wyatt was already outside, chopping wood when it happened. A crash from the back of the barn. A board splintered, not from age, but force. He ran to it, axe in hand, heart already racing. The back wall had been kicked in. Inside, one of the horses lay on its side, flank bleeding from a knife slash. The others whinnied and stamped, eyes wild. Clara came running with Mercy bundled tight. Wyatt shouted, "Stay inside!" She didn't argue. He searched the barn and the tree line, but whoever had done it was long gone. No tracks, no scent, just a message, scratched into the wood with something sharp. You can't protect what ain't yours. Wyatt stood there a long time, hand pressed to the carved words, breath thick in his chest. He'd known war, known the sound of bullets and the way men screamed when death found them. But this was different. This was personal, and worse, it was calculated. He buried the horse behind the barn, built the grave deep and wide. Then he went inside, cleaned his hands, and took Mercy into his arms. He held her like the world was trying to take her, and he hadn't made peace with letting go. Clara sat beside him and whispered, "He's close, isn't he?" Wyatt nodded. "Then we need to be ready." He looked at her. Not the girl who'd collapsed under the tree, not the stranger bleeding into his floorboards. He looked at Clara, mother, survivor, the one who named a child Mercy, when the world gave her none, and he said, "We'll be ready." That night, he stayed by the window until the fire went out, rifle across his knees, heart like a hammer in his chest. He didn't sleep. But in the dark, Mercy smiled in her dreams. Wyatt no longer hoped they wouldn't come. Hope was a luxury, long abandoned. He sat by the window each night, eyes open long after Clara and Mercy had fallen into whatever shallow sleep they could manage. He didn't count the days since the barn was hit. What mattered now was that it had begun. The threats were no longer shadows, no longer abstract. They'd left their mark, and marks had a way of growing. He reinforced the barn wall, replaced the broken boards with stronger timber, and double-locked the stable. The animals grew skittish, sensing what the people wouldn't say out loud. Clara offered to help, and she did, quiet, tireless, and without asking questions. Sometimes Wyatt caught her humming to Mercy while stitching, the same soft hymn in a voice frayed by everything she'd endured. Then came the note. It was wrapped in twine, left on their porch in broad daylight. Wyatt found it after returning. From the creek, rifle on his back, eyes peeled as always. The paper was thick, torn from the inside of a ledger, the handwriting crooked but deliberate. A man don't get to keep what don't belong. You have 1 week, no signature, no demands, just the deadline. Wyatt burned the note in the stove, then turned to Clara and said, "We'll need to move the horses tonight, into the eastern thicket. If they come for the barn again, I won't let them find anything worth taking." Clara didn't flinch. "What about us? We stay put. We should go, Wyatt." He shook his head. "He wants you scared, wants you running, but this is where it ends." Clara's lips tightened, the way they did when she wanted to argue but knew better than to waste breath. Mercy stirred in her arms, her whimper too quiet to wake fear yet, but loud enough to remind them of what waited if they faltered. Wyatt moved the horses under moonlight, walking them through the thickets, far from the trail and hidden where only he could find them. Again, he left Salt and Oats, covered their tracks with brush and dirt, and returned before dawn with dirt on his palms and a pulse that wouldn't slow. Clara met him on the porch. "You didn't sleep." "Didn't need to." "Wyatt." He turned to her. "What?" "I need to know something, and I don't care if the answer makes it harder." He waited. "If I hadn't come here, if I hadn't been pregnant, would you have taken me in?" He looked at her for a long time. Too long. "I don't know," he admitted. She nodded slowly. "Thank you for not lying." Then she went inside, and he was left alone with his honesty. The next 2 days passed without event, which only made them more dangerous. Nothing ever stayed quiet unless it was building toward noise. Wyatt knew that better than most. He checked the fence line twice a day, sat up through every night, and, during the in-between hours, he built traps. Low to the ground, easy to miss. Cans filled with stones buried beneath the porch steps, tripwires near the back path, and bells strung inside the barn rafters. It wasn't about catching them. It was about knowing when they were coming. Clara cooked, cleaned, tended to Mercy, but there was steel in her now. She walked taller, kept the shotgun nearby, asked Wyatt to teach her how to use it. He did, not with joy, but with understanding. On. The sixth night, the wind changed. Wyatt smelled them before he heard them. Saddle sweat, cheap whiskey, old leather. Scents he hadn't smelled since the war. He didn't move, didn't blink. 3 men. They stopped just outside the barn. There, silhouettes long in the moonlight. They didn't speak, didn't knock. One of them tossed a flask into the dirt. The metal caught the light, glinting like a mirror turned toward judgment. Wyatt stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. "Evening," the tallest one said. His voice was dry, like dust on gravel. "You, Wyatt Calder?" "I am." He nodded toward the house. "Got something in there belongs to my boss." Wyatt didn't move. "Don't see his name on anything here." The man smiled without teeth. "Funny, he says otherwise." "Then he should have come himself." "Oh, he's close. Closer than you think." Wyatt raised the rifle just enough to be noticed. "This is your only warning." The other 2 men shifted, hands near their holsters, not quite drawing. The tall one just chuckled. "All right, rancher, you made your point, but if I were you, I'd pack up. The boss don't take kindly to thieves." "Neither do I," Wyatt said. The man tipped his hat. "One more day." Then they turned and walked off like they'd never been there. Wyatt didn't sleep. Neither did Clara. They both knew what came next. By morning, Wyatt had barricaded the front windows and set oil lamps near every corner of the house. He placed a revolver in the drawer beside Clara's bed and showed her how to reload it. She didn't cry, didn't flinch, just listened. When she kissed Mercy's forehead, it was the kind of kiss people give before they lose something. The storm came that night, 3 riders at first, then 5. The first shot cracked the air like a thunderclap. Wyatt fired from the front window, striking the lead horse, sending the rider tumbling into dirt and curses. Clara stayed upstairs, Mercy wrapped in cloth, gun in hand. They came fast. Too fast. Bullets splintered wood, tore through the porch, shattered the windows. Wyatt moved like instinct, years of muscle memory rising like ghosts from the grave. He shot one man clean off his saddle. Another ran for the barn, fell before he reached the door, courtesy of the trap Wyatt laid 2 days earlier. But there were more. Too many. They circled the house, shouting orders Wyatt couldn't quite hear. Then came a different voice, louder, deeper, a command, not a request. "Clara!" She froze upstairs. "Clara, it's me. Come on out, and I'll let the rancher live." Wyatt's blood turned to ice. Clara crept to the top of the stairs, peered through the broken window. Her voice came out hoarse. "Isaiah," the voice laughed. "Took you long enough." Wyatt turned to her, whispering, "Don't." But she was already moving, already heading for the stairs. He blocked her path. "No. If I don't go out there, he won't stop. He won't stop either way." She shook her head. "You don't know him like I do." "I know men like him." Clara's eyes were wild with fear. "I can't let him kill you. Not for me." "I'm not doing this for you," Wyatt growled. "I'm doing this for her." That stopped her. They stared at each other across the wreck of their home, across bullets, across truth. Then, from outside. "Last chance, girl. You come out, or I burn the whole place down." Wyatt moved, fast. He grabbed a jug of lamp oil, soaked a rag, and shoved it into the mouth of an empty liquor bottle. Clara watched in horror. "You're not—" "Stay down." He lit the rag, stepped outside. Through. The Molotov soared, arcing like justice. It hit the wagon behind Isaiah and burst into flame. The horses screamed. The men scattered, Wyatt fired, shot 2 more, then dropped behind the porch as bullets sang past his ears. Clara fired from the window. Missed. Then fired again, this time striking a man in the leg. He fell, howling. Isaiah shouted, "Enough! Clara, you've made your choice." Then silence. Wyatt waited, heart pounding. Then, the sound of something clicking. A fuse. His eyes widened. "Clara, get down!" The explosion rocked the barn. Flames swallowed the wood, black smoke rising like judgment. They'd set charges, meant to burn everything. Wyatt pulled Clara to the floor, shielded her with his body as debris rained down. Mercy screamed. From upstairs, but alive. Alive. When the smoke cleared, the raiders were gone. The barn was ash. The land scorched. The silence worse than any scream. Wyatt crawled to his feet, face streaked with soot and blood. Clara held Mercy tight, whispering something over and over. Wyatt leaned in. "Forgive us, forgive us, forgive us." He didn't speak, just sat beside her, took her hand, and swore to himself that it wasn't over. The sun rose over scorched earth, but it brought no warmth. Smoke still curled from what remained of the barn, drifting upward in a quiet, gray spiral that looked like a prayer long since abandoned. Wyatt stood in the middle of the wreckage, his boots deep in soot and ash, watching the last cinders die. The horses were gone. Gone before the fire reached them, thank God, but the tools, the hay, the supplies, the heart of the ranch, they'd turned to black dust. He hadn't spoken since the explosion. Clara came out barefoot, holding Mercy tight to her chest. The baby didn't cry. Not yet. There was something eerie in her silence, like even she understood that the world had shifted and might never shift back. Clara's dress was torn at the shoulder, dirt smudged across her face, hair hanging loose. She looked like a ghost made of grit and grief. But she stood tall. Wyatt turned, eyes hollow. "They'll come again." She nodded once. "They know where we are. And they're not done." "I know." He stared back at the smoking barn. "Neither am I." There was no time for mourning. No luxury of tears or time spent counting losses. They salvaged what they could. Nails from half-burnt boards, tools blackened but still usable, buckets charred on one side. Wyatt said little as he worked. His movements were sharp, purposeful, like he was holding himself together with every nail he drove into the ground, every board he lifted. Clara cooked what little food remained. She kept Mercy near always, whispering softly to her like if she just stayed speaking, the baby wouldn't realize how close they'd come to being buried under fire and blood. The land no longer felt like home. It felt like a trap waiting to be sprung again. But they didn't leave. Wyatt had seen worse. War, betrayal, death that walked on 2 legs and smiled while it stabbed. But something about this, about Isaiah knowing Clara, knowing her name, speaking it like a curse and a claim, it twisted inside Wyatt. He'd seen many men do monstrous things, but the ones who believed they had a right to what was never theirs, they were the most dangerous. That night, Wyatt sat with Clara by the cold fire pit. The stars were bright, untouched by the ruin below. "Who is he?" Wyatt asked finally. Clara hesitated, then spoke slowly. "Isaiah Mathers. I was promised to him." Wyatt's brow furrowed. "Promised? My father, he owed debts, deep ones. Isaiah offered to clear them in exchange for me. Said I'd be his bride. I was 17. Wyatt clenched his jaw. But I said no. My father begged, but I wouldn't. So I ran. Where to? Everywhere. I stayed with an older couple first, then a church. Moved towns whenever I felt eyes on me. I thought I was free. I thought he'd stop caring. But he doesn't. Want a wife. He wants obedience. And when I got pregnant, she trailed off. You thought he'd stop chasing. I thought the shame would make him let go, that he'd be done with me." Wyatt's voice was low, quiet. "Who's the father?" Clara shook her head. "I don't know. Not in the way. You think. There was a storm. I got caught trying to travel. A man offered help, took me in, gave me shelter. Then he didn't let me leave." Wyatt didn't speak for a long time. "I was barely alive when I got out," she whispered. "Mercy wasn't even a heartbeat yet. Just a shadow inside me." Wyatt reached over, took her hand. It was cold. She didn't pull away. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "But I do. You've given us more than anyone ever has." "Didn't give it. I protected it. That's not the same." She looked at him then, really looked. "Why? Why protect me at all?" He stared into the fire pit's ashes. "Because I've lost too much to let something good burn without trying to stop it." Clara blinked back something that wasn't quite tears, and for the first time since the attack, she smiled. Just barely. But it was enough to remind them both that they were still human. The days that followed were a fragile balancing act. Repair, guard, feed, protect. Wyatt knew he couldn't keep defending the land alone. He needed help, but trusted no one. The sheriff in town had long since sold his conscience for a bottle and a bribe. The neighbors were too far, and most had their own troubles. Wyatt considered riding out to Fort Delver, 30 miles east, but leaving Clara and Mercy behind wasn't an option. Not with Isaiah somewhere out there. Then, on the fourth morning after the fire, something unexpected happened. A man rode up the trail, alone. Hands raised, Wyatt met him at the gate, rifle in one hand, hammer in the other. "You got about 10 seconds to explain why you're here," he said. The next 2 days passed without event, which only made them more dangerous. Nothing ever stayed quiet unless it was building toward noise. Wyatt knew that better than most. He checked the fence line twice a day, sat up through every night, and, during the in-between hours, he built traps. Low to the ground, easy to miss. Cans filled with stones buried beneath the porch steps, tripwires near the back path, and bells strung inside the barn rafters. It wasn't about catching them. It was about knowing when they were coming. Clara cooked, cleaned, tended to Mercy, but there was steel in her now. She walked taller, kept the shotgun nearby, asked Wyatt to teach her how to use it. He did, not with joy, but with understanding. On. The 6th night, the wind changed. Wyatt smelled them before he heard them. Saddle sweat, cheap whiskey, old leather. Scents he hadn't smelled since the war. He didn't move, didn't blink. 3 men. They stopped just outside the barn. There, silhouettes long in the moonlight. They didn't speak, didn't knock. One of them tossed a flask into the dirt. The metal caught the light, glinting like a mirror turned toward judgment. Wyatt stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. "Evening," the tallest one said. His voice was dry, like dust on gravel. "You, Wyatt Calder?" "I am." He nodded toward the house. "Got something in there belongs to my boss." Wyatt didn't move. "Don't see his name on anything here." The man smiled without teeth. "Funny, he says otherwise." "Then he should have come himself." "Oh, he's close. Closer than you think." Wyatt raised the rifle just enough to be noticed. "This is your only warning." The other 2 men shifted, hands near their holsters, not quite drawing. The tall one just chuckled. "All right, rancher, you made your point. But if I were you, I'd pack up. The boss don't take kindly to thieves." "Neither do I," Wyatt said. The man tipped his hat. "One more day." Then they turned and walked off like they'd never been there. Wyatt didn't sleep. Neither did Clara. They both knew what came next. By morning, Wyatt had barricaded the front windows and set oil lamps near every corner of the house. He placed a revolver in the drawer beside Clara's bed and showed her how to reload it. She didn't cry, didn't flinch, just listened. When she kissed Mercy's forehead, it was the kind of kiss people give before they lose something. The storm came that night, 3 riders at first, then 5. The first shot cracked the air like a thunderclap. Wyatt fired from the front window, striking the lead horse, sending the rider tumbling into dirt and curses. Clara stayed upstairs, Mercy wrapped in cloth, gun in hand. They came fast. Too fast. Bullets splintered wood, tore through the porch, shattered the windows. Wyatt moved like instinct, years of muscle memory rising like ghosts from the grave. He shot one man clean off his saddle. Another ran for the barn, fell before he reached the door, courtesy of the trap Wyatt laid 2 days earlier. But there were more. Too many. They circled the house, shouting orders Wyatt couldn't quite hear. Then came a different voice, louder, deeper. A command, not a request. "Clara!" She froze upstairs. "Clara, it's me. Come on out, and I'll let the rancher live." Wyatt's blood turned to ice. Clara crept to the top of the stairs, peered through the broken window. Her voice came out hoarse. "Isaiah," the voice laughed. "Took you long enough." Wyatt turned to her, whispering, "Don't." But she was already moving, already heading for the stairs. He blocked her path. "No. If I don't go out there, he won't stop. He won't stop either way." She shook her head. "You don't know him like I do." "I know men like him." Clara's eyes were wild with fear. "I can't let him kill you. Not for me." "I'm not doing this for you," Wyatt growled. "I'm doing this for her." That stopped her. They stared at each other across the wreck of their home, across bullets, across truth. Then, from outside. "Last chance, girl. You come out, or I burn the whole place down." Wyatt moved, fast. He grabbed a jug of lamp oil, soaked a rag, and shoved it into the mouth of an empty liquor bottle. Clara watched in horror. "You're not—" "Stay down." He lit the rag, stepped outside. Through. The Molotov soared, arcing like justice. It hit the wagon behind Isaiah and burst into flame. The horses screamed. The men scattered. Wyatt fired, shot 2 more, then dropped behind the porch as bullets sang past his ears. Clara fired from the window. Missed. Then fired again, this time striking a man in the leg. He fell, howling. Isaiah shouted, "Enough! Clara, you've made your choice." Then silence. Wyatt waited, heart pounding. Then, the sound of something clicking. A fuse. His eyes widened. "Clara, get down!" The explosion rocked the barn. Flames swallowed the wood, black smoke rising like judgment. They'd set charges, meant to burn everything. Wyatt pulled Clara to the floor, shielded her with his body as debris rained down. Mercy screamed. From upstairs, but alive. Alive. When the smoke cleared, the raiders were gone. The barn was ash. The land scorched. The silence worse than any scream. Wyatt crawled to his feet, face streaked with soot and blood. Clara held Mercy tight, whispering something over and over. Wyatt leaned in. "Forgive us. Forgive us. Forgive us." He didn't speak, just sat beside her, took her hand, and swore to himself that it wasn't over. The sun rose over scorched earth, but it brought no warmth. Smoke still curled from what remained of the barn, drifting upward in a quiet, gray spiral that looked like a prayer long since abandoned. Wyatt stood in the middle of the wreckage, his boots deep in soot and ash, watching the last cinders die. The horses were gone. Gone before the fire reached them, thank God, but the tools, the hay, the supplies, the heart of the ranch, they'd turned to black dust. He hadn't spoken since the explosion. Clara came out barefoot, holding Mercy tight to her chest. The baby didn't cry. Not yet. There was something eerie in her silence, like even she understood that the world had shifted and might never shift back. Clara's dress was torn at the shoulder, dirt smudged across her face, hair hanging loose. She looked like a ghost made of grit and grief. But she stood tall. Wyatt turned, eyes hollow. "They'll come again." She nodded once. They know where we are. And they're not done. I know. He stared back at the smoking barn. Neither am I. There was no time for mourning. No luxury of tears or time spent counting losses. They salvaged what they could. Nails from half-burnt boards, tools blackened but still usable, buckets charred on one side. Wyatt said little as he worked. His movements were sharp, purposeful, like he was holding himself together with every nail he drove into the ground, every board he lifted. Clara cooked what little food remained. She kept Mercy near always, whispering softly to her like if she just stayed speaking, the baby wouldn't realize how close they'd come to being buried under fire and blood. The land no longer felt like home. It felt like a trap waiting to be sprung again. But they didn't leave. Wyatt had seen worse. War, betrayal, death that walked on two legs and smiled while it stabbed. But something about this, about Isaiah knowing Clara, knowing her name, speaking it like a curse and a claim, it twisted inside Wyatt. He'd seen many men do monstrous things, but the ones who believed they had a right to what was never theirs, they were the most dangerous. That night, Wyatt sat with Clara by the cold fire pit. The stars were bright, untouched by the ruin below. "Who is he?" Wyatt asked finally. Clara hesitated, then spoke slowly. "Isaiah Mathers. I was promised to him." Wyatt's brow furrowed. "Promised? My father, he owed debts, deep ones. Isaiah offered to clear them in exchange for me. Said I'd be his bride. I was 17. Wyatt clenched his jaw. But I said no. My father begged, but I wouldn't. So I ran. Where to? Everywhere. I stayed with an older couple first, then a church. Moved towns whenever I felt eyes on me. I thought I was free. I thought he'd stop caring. But he doesn't. Want a wife. He wants obedience. And when I got pregnant, she trailed off. You thought he'd stop chasing. I thought the shame would make him let go, that he'd be done with me." Wyatt's voice was low, quiet. "Who's the father?" Clara shook her head. "I don't know. Not in the way. You think. There was a storm. I got caught trying to travel. A man offered help. Took me in. Gave me shelter. Then he didn't let me leave." Wyatt didn't speak for a long time. "I was barely alive when I got out," she whispered. "Mercy wasn't even a heartbeat yet. Just a shadow inside me." Wyatt reached over, took her hand. It was cold. She didn't pull away. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "But I do. You've given us more than anyone ever has." "Didn't give it. I protected it. That's not the same." She looked at him then, really looked. "Why? Why protect me at all?" He stared into the fire pit's ashes. "Because I've lost too much to let something good burn without trying to stop it." Clara blinked back something that wasn't quite tears, and for the first time since the attack, she smiled. Just barely. But it was enough to remind them both that they were still human. The days that followed were a fragile balancing act. Repair, guard, feed, protect. Wyatt knew he couldn't keep defending the land alone. He needed help, but trusted no one. The sheriff in town had long since sold his conscience for a bottle and a bribe. The neighbors were too far, and most had their own troubles. Wyatt considered riding out to Fort Delver, 30 miles east, but leaving Clara and Mercy behind wasn't an option. Not with Isaiah somewhere out there. Then, on the fourth morning after the fire, something unexpected happened. A man rode up the trail, alone. Hands raised, Wyatt met him at the gate, rifle in one hand, hammer in the other. "You got about 10 seconds to explain why you're here," he said. "Mason scouted the hills that afternoon. 4 riders," he said, "camped by the dry ridge, probably more hidden." Wyatt loaded the rifles. "They'll come at night. They always do." Wyatt looked at Clara. "We can run." "No." "Clara." "No," she said again, more firmly. "I ran enough. If we run now, we're telling Mercy to live in fear. I won't do that." They fortified the house, boards on the windows, traps in the field, fire barrels filled. Mason taught June how to hold her. Ground. Ruth refused a weapon but agreed to stay with Mercy in the cellar. Clara stood at the porch, shotgun in hand, hair tied back. "Whatever happens," she said to Wyatt, "we end this tonight." And that night they came. Not 4. 9 dark riders, in silence like shadows come to collect a debt. The first trap triggered with a blast, sending one man flying off his horse. The others scattered. Mason fired from the roof. Clara took the front steps. Wyatt circled to the back, rifle steady. The fight wasn't clean, it was chaos. Gunshots echoed in the hills. Horses screamed, men shouted. One of them threw a torch at the house. It landed in the yard, flames catching the grass. Wyatt tackled him before the second throw. They rolled in the dirt, fists and knees and snarls. Wyatt drove his elbow down hard, and the man didn't get. "Back up!" Clara shouted something from the porch, but her voice cut off. Wyatt turned just in time to see her fall. A figure stood over her. One of Isaiah's men. Knife raised. Wyatt didn't think. He didn't breathe. He fired once. The man dropped. Clara lay bleeding, arm gashed, but alive. Wyatt lifted her, shouting for Mason. By the time the last rider fled, the yard was a mess of smoke and blood and broken wood. Ruth emerged with Mercy, eyes wide. Mason had taken a bullet in the leg but was still standing. June clutched a wounded arm but smiled through the pain. Wyatt carried Clara inside, laid her on the table, tore cloth into bandages. His hands didn't shake. His heart did. "I'm fine," she whispered. "I'm fine." "You're bleeding." "Not dead." Wyatt pressed the cloth harder. "You scared me." She smiled weakly. "You get scared." He didn't answer, just kissed her forehead. They won that night, but it cost them. Wyatt buried 3 more bodies behind the barn. Mason sat beside him after, pipe in hand. "You know they won't stop," the old man said. "They never do." Wyatt stared at the horizon. "Then we don't stop either." The sun rose heavy the next morning. It didn't sneak in like it usually did, with soft gold slipping through the windows. It blasted its way over the hills, too bright, too hot, and without apology. The ranch looked like a battlefield, because that's what it was now. The yard was littered with the bones of war, shattered fence rails, blood-stained dirt, blackened scorch marks from torches and traps. Smoke still hung in the air like a ghost reluctant to leave. Clara was resting upstairs. Her arm had taken the worst of it, torn deep by the knife before Wyatt's bullet found its mark. She hadn't cried. She hadn't even made a sound when they stitched her up by lantern light. She just stared at the ceiling, pale and quiet, Mercy pressed to her chest, as if the only thing anchoring her to the earth was that child's heartbeat against her own. Wyatt hadn't slept. He spent the night walking the perimeter, rifle in hand, boots dragging through the dust. He kept expecting another wave, another rider out of the dark, but nothing came. Just the stars above and the smell of blood thick in the air. By mid-morning, Mason and June were outside working in silence. Mason limped, one pant leg stained and torn, but he carried lumber like it weighed nothing. June followed him, quieter than usual. The adrenaline had worn off, and her face wore the kind of stillness that only came after too many close calls. Inside, Ruth made breakfast. She wasn't much of a cook, but no one complained. She kept glancing upstairs, like waiting for Clara. To call out, or worse, not call at all. Wyatt finally broke the silence at the table. "She's resting." Ruth nodded. "She's strong." Wyatt said nothing. He just looked at the empty chair beside him and then down at his calloused hands. He didn't feel strong. He felt worn thin, like everything inside him had been stretched too far, and if one more thing happened, it might all snap. After breakfast, he went to see Clara. She was awake. Propped up on pillows, Mercy dozing beside her, a wet cloth folded on her brow. She turned her head slowly when Wyatt entered, and despite everything, she smiled. "You look worse than I feel," she whispered. "You always know how to charm a man." She reached for his hand, and he sat down on the edge of the bed, his fingers curling gently into hers. He could feel the tremble in her grip. "Last night," she murmured, "I thought I was going to die." "You didn't. But I thought I was. And the strangest thing is, I wasn't afraid for me." Wyatt waited. "I was afraid Mercy would forget me, that she'd grow up and not remember my voice or my face, that she'd think someone else was her mama." "She won't forget," Wyatt said. "She's not losing you." Clara blinked hard, her throat moving as she swallowed. "I never thought I'd be a mother. Never imagined it. I was supposed to be a wife, first. Supposed to meet someone in church, take his name, be kissed on the steps of a white house with a porch swing. But then everything went sideways. My father died, the debts came, and before I knew it, I was just running." Wyatt squeezed her hand gently. "I didn't know where I was going," she continued, voice soft. "But when I collapsed under that tree and I saw you, your boots, your quiet face, I thought maybe I'd stopped running." Wyatt swallowed, jaw tight. "You did." Clara looked at him then, really looked. "And what about you, Wyatt? Were you running too?" He thought about it. "I wasn't running. I'd already stopped. I just didn't know it. I'd let everything go quiet inside, let the ranch get smaller, let the days slip by. I thought I was surviving, but now I think I was just waiting." "For what?" He reached down and brushed a loose curl from her temple. "For you." Clara's breath caught, and in that pause, that fragile moment of stillness, Mercy stirred beside them and let out a sigh that sounded almost like contentment. Later that afternoon, a wagon arrived, not fast, not aggressive, just a creaking cart pulled by a tired old mule, dust rising behind it in lazy swirls. Wyatt stepped onto the porch as it came up the path. Mason was already on the roof, rifle slung casually but not forgotten. The man on the wagon was middle-aged, sunburnt, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a stained shirt. He raised a hand in peace. "Don't shoot," he called. "Ain't here for trouble." Wyatt didn't answer right away. "Who sent you?" The man pulled the wagon to a stop. "Name's Emery. I'm a friend of Sheriff Mays." That name still carried weight, even if it hadn't earned trust yet. "I'm a doctor," Emery continued. "Well, was, once. Mays said someone might be hurt up this way, told me to come check." Wyatt narrowed his eyes, then stepped down from the porch. "We'll take your help, but keep your hands where I can see 'em." The man nodded and climbed down slowly. Emery tended to Clara first. He was gentle and quiet, explaining every step as he cleaned the wound again, checked for infection, rewrapped the bandages. Clara watched him the whole time, but she didn't flinch. When he was done, he gave a small nod of approval. "She's healing fine," he said to Wyatt. "Strong girl." He checked Mason's leg, pronounced it a mess but manageable, and gave June something for the pain in her arm. Then he packed up his bag and turned to leave. Before he climbed into the wagon, he looked at Wyatt. "Mays is cleaning house," he said. "He's scared, but he's trying." Wyatt grunted. "I'll believe it when I see it." Emery didn't argue. He just tipped his hat and rode off. That night, Wyatt and Clara sat on the porch again. The sky was full of stars, sharp and bright. Mercy was asleep inside, Ruth humming a lullaby from the rocking chair. Mason and June had gone to bed early. Clara leaned her head on Wyatt's shoulder. "Do you think it's over?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "I think we'll always be looking over our shoulders," he said finally. "But I also think the worst is behind us." Clara sighed. "Good, because I'm tired." He turned to her. "Then rest. Oh, keep watch." And she did. Days passed, each one softer than the last. Clara healed. Mercy grew. Ruth began to laugh again, once while picking tomatoes. June took over morning chores without being asked. Mason taught Wyatt how to track signs in the dirt he'd forgotten long ago. And Wyatt, he started smiling. Not often, not big, but enough that the lines in his face began to look less like scars and more like history. Then, one morning, a letter arrived, not tacked to a fence, not carried by threat. It was delivered by hand, by Sheriff Mays himself. He rode in alone, hat in hand, face clean-shaven for the first time in years. Clara watched him from the porch, Mercy asleep against her shoulder. Wyatt. Met him halfway down the path. Can we talk? Mays asked. Wyatt nodded once. They walked out to the edge of the field where the sky met the earth and the wind smelled like wheat and dust. I kept my word, Mays said. Isaiah's boys are gone. The ones who stayed are under lock. Others fled. And the ones still out there? We'll deal with them if they come back. Wyatt looked out at the hills. They always come back. Mays shifted. Maybe, but I think they'll think twice about this place now. Word spreads. They'll hear what happened. Wyatt crossed his arms. You want something? Mays smiled, just barely. Not a thing. Just came to say thanks, and to let you know, town's changing. Slowly, but it is. Thought you should know you've got allies, and if you ever need a deputy. He let the offer hang, then nodded. I'll see myself out. He left the letter behind. It was short. Just a few words in May's own hand. You're not alone anymore. Wyatt gave it to Clara, who read it twice before folding it into her Bible. She didn't say anything, but her eyes lingered on the horizon a long while after. That night, after, the others were asleep. Wyatt sat in the rocking chair, Mercy in his arms. The baby's breath was warm against his chest, steady and small. Clara came to the doorway, wrapped in a shawl, her silhouette soft in the candlelight. Mind some company? She asked. He shook his head, and she sat beside him. The night air was cool, peaceful. I think, Clara said after a while, I'm starting to believe we can make it. We can, Wyatt replied. She looked at him. Even with everything that's happened, even with what's still coming. Wyatt turned to her. Especially because of it. And in that moment, beneath the stars, the ghosts of fire and violence fading into memory, they weren't just survivors. They weren't just protectors. They were becoming something more. A family. The summer dragged its heels as if reluctant to give way. Days burned long and the nights stayed warm, wind slipping over the fields like breath through an open window. The quiet felt earned now. Not empty like before, but sacred. A kind of silence that held memories instead of ghosts. Clara's arm healed slow. Some mornings it ached so bad she couldn't lift Mercy, and Wyatt had to take the child while she rubbed her shoulder raw, praying under her breath. But she never complained. Not once. Because compared to the pain of what came before, this was nothing. This she could live through. And, more importantly, this she could live with. Mercy had started smiling. Not just in her sleep, but real ones. Gummy, bright, crooked little grins that made even the stiffest faces soften. Mason swore she smiled more when Clara sang, and Ruth said she liked the smell of horses. June, still limping from a wound that hadn't quite closed, insisted Mercy had a warrior's soul. Wyatt just held her sometimes, not saying much, and listened to her tiny heartbeat against his ribs. And Clara, she watched him. There were moments now, when Wyatt stood in the doorway watching the light fade over the hills. That something in. His eyes looked less like a man counting down the end of things and more like a man learning to begin again. But peace had a cost. The land didn't forget, and neither did Wyatt. He'd taken the men that came for Clara and buried them with his own hands. It wasn't mercy. It was necessity. Graves far out past the south field, marked only by stones. He'd carved a cross into each one, even for the man who'd tried to take mercy. Clara found him once, kneeling by one of those graves, his hat in his lap, the sun baking down hard. She didn't ask what he prayed for. She just put her hand on his shoulder and knelt beside him, because some prayers are better whispered with someone beside you. Then, one morning, the dog barked, a sound they hadn't heard in weeks. Ruth opened the door and saw the dust trail first. A rider, lone, coming from the north. Not fast, not aggressive, but not casual either. Wyatt stepped out with his rifle. Clara stood just inside the doorway, Mercy on her hip. The man rode closer. Older, bearded, wearing a leather vest with the sleeves torn. His eyes were hidden beneath the brim of his hat. Wyatt raised the rifle. "That's close enough." The man stopped. "Ain't here to shoot." Wyatt didn't lower the gun. The stranger reached slowly into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. He held it up high, then tossed it into the dirt. Letter from Mays. Mason came from the barn, squinting. "Why's the sheriff sendin' letters through strangers now?" The man just waited. Wyatt walked forward, keeping his rifle up. He picked up the letter, turned it over. Sure enough, May's handwriting scrawled across the seal. He cracked it open, read it twice. "What's it say?" Clara called. Wyatt frowned. "He wants to meet. Now. Tomorrow. Says it's urgent." Wyatt looked at the stranger. "Why didn't he come himself?" The man didn't flinch. "Town's been hit, twice in the last month. Mays is holding ground, but says he can't do it alone anymore." Mason spit in the dirt. "So, now he wants help." The man turned his head, just slightly. "A gang's coming through the valley. Not Isaiah's boys, bigger, meaner. They're not interested in land. They want bodies. They're collectin'." That word landed hard. Collectin'. Wyatt's grip tightened. "For what?" "No one knows, but they're not just robbin'. They're takin'. Women, children, strong men, disappear. No ransom, no message." Clara stepped closer to the porch rail. "And Mays thinks they'll come here?" The man nodded. "It's not if, it's when." Wyatt looked at Mason, then back to Clara. "You trust Mays?" he asked the stranger. The man shrugged. "I don't trust no man, but I trust the fear in his eyes. That was real." He turned his horse. "You've got till sundown tomorrow. After that, the sheriff rides without you." And he left. The air felt heavier after that. They gathered around the table. The letter passed from hand to hand. June read it twice, her fingers lingering on one phrase. "The hills are bleeding." She whispered it like scripture, and Ruth crossed herself. "Can't just ride into it," Mason said. "Not with Clara and the baby." Clara straightened. "Don't decide for me." "No one's decidin' for anyone," Wyatt said. "But we need a plan, fast." Clara stood and paced, bouncing Mercy softly as the baby fussed. "If they're taking people, we don't want to be here when they come." "Where would we go?" Ruth asked. "The valley's the only way out, and if they're there—" "Then we hold here," Wyatt said, "like before." June rubbed her leg. "We barely survived that last attack." "This ain't about surviving," Wyatt said. "This is about not letting them take what we've built." He looked at Clara. "At what we've become." That night, no one slept. They reinforced the windows, laid traps at the borders of the property, stacked firewood and barrels of water inside the house. Mason set up lookout posts. June drew a rough map of the valley based on the stranger's warning. Wyatt spent hours in the barn with his old revolver, cleaning and loading until the sun rose behind the mountains. But something was different this time. It wasn't panic driving them. It was purpose. They weren't scattered souls anymore. They were one body now, one heartbeat. A family. The next morning, Wyatt saddled his horse. Clara packed him food. She didn't cry, didn't plead, just kissed his cheek and said, "Come back to me." He nodded. Always. The road to town was long, and he didn't look back once. Mays was waiting at the church, not in his office, not behind a desk, at the altar. The pews were empty, the windows boarded up. Dust floated in the sunbeams like ghosts without names. "Wyatt," Mays said, standing. "Didn't think you'd come. Didn't think you'd ask." Mays gestured to a bench. They sat. "There's a group coming through called the Hollow Suns," Mays said. "Name fits. They ride quiet, faces covered. They burn what they can't take. Why, here. We're on the edge, no law worth anything between us and the next county. We're the last stop before open wilderness. If they take this town, they take the whole valley." Wyatt looked at the stained glass. Above the altar, it was cracked. "How many men you got?" he asked. Mays swallowed. 8, maybe 10, if the McCrearys show up. "And you want me?" Mays hesitated. "I want us. What you did out there, that scared 'em. Word is, you held off 6 armed men with 2 girls and a boy fresh off the warpath." Word's generous, but it's word. That's what matters. Now, reputation, fear. I need yours beside mine. Even if we lose, I want 'em to remember we didn't fold. Wyatt stood. "We'll ride with you, but on our terms." Mays nodded. "Of course." As Wyatt turned to go, Mays stopped him. "One more thing." He handed over a folded cloth. Inside it, Wyatt's badge. "Took it off your body the day they dragged you out of town." Wyatt looked at the metal. The edges were dulled. The star still gleamed. "I'm not that man anymore." Mays shrugged. "Doesn't matter. The badge remembers." Back at the ranch, the wind had changed. Clara could feel it in her bones. Mercy was fussier. The horses restless. The birds had stopped singing. When Wyatt returned, his face was carved from stone. "They'll be here in 2 days," he said. Clara nodded. "Then we prepare." And they did, like clockwork. Every board nailed, every trap set, every route mapped. They sharpened knives and dug trenches. Wyatt gave Mason a second rifle. June crafted oil bombs from empty bottles. Ruth stocked every corner of the cellar with food and water. Clara tied Mercy to her chest, kept her close, never more than 10 feet from Wyatt. And on the evening before the day the Hollow Suns were expected, they stood together on the porch, the land quiet around them. "You scared?" Wyatt asked her. Clara looked at him. "Yes. Me too." She took his hand. "But I've never felt safer, because fear was a fact. But love, that was a choice, and in choosing each other they'd chosen to fight. For their home, for their daughter. For the family no one thought they deserved, but they'd bled to build. When the horizon burned with torchlight the next night, no one flinched. They were ready, and whatever storm was coming, it would have to go through them. The first torch appeared like a wound in the dark, then another, then 20 more. By the time the Hollow Suns reached the edge of the fields, the land looked like it was on fire. Flames danced in the hands of men with no names, no faces, just rags tied tight over mouths and eyes that burned with something far colder than hatred. They didn't ride like wild men. They rode like soldiers. Purposeful, clean, silent. Wyatt stood in the barn doorway, rifle slung, eyes never blinking. He watched them form a loose horseshoe across the northern ridge. Not close enough to shoot, not close enough to shout, just enough to be seen. "They want us to know we're surrounded," Mason muttered from the loft. "Let 'em," Wyatt said. "They'll think longer before stepping foot on this dirt." Inside the house, Clara held Mercy against her shoulder. The baby had fallen into an uneasy sleep, her soft breath hot on Clara's skin. Ruth read from the book of Psalms, not loud, just low enough for God to hear. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Outside, June paced the upstairs hall with a lantern, loading her revolver one round at a time. Her leg still hurt, but she walked through it. Pain was just another language, and she was fluent now. By dawn, the hollow suns hadn't moved. "They're waiting for something," Wyatt said, scanning the tree line. "Orders, or nerves to settle." Mason tightened his grip on the fence rail. "Maybe they think we'll run." Wyatt shook his head. "No, they want us to." He turned, called up to the house. "June." She appeared at the window. "If this goes bad, you take the back trail with Clara and Ruth. Take Mercy, ride west, don't stop." June nodded. "And if it doesn't go bad? Then you won't need to run." Noon came like a hammer. The sun beat down hard and high, making the dust glisten like broken glass. The hollow suns began to shift. Slow, subtle. Two men rode forward, unarmed. One carried a white cloth. They stopped 50 yards from the house. Wyatt walked out to meet them alone. The lead rider was thin as a rail, long black hair tied in a knot behind his head, a scar down the left side of his face. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. His voice was calm. "We don't need a war." Wyatt didn't answer. "Just the girl," the rider continued. "You give her up, we turn around. No fire, no blood." Wyatt let the silence stretch so long it bent. Then, "You've got no right to ask. She don't belong to you." "She doesn't belong to any of you." The rider's jaw flexed. "She's marked. We paid for her. We lost men because of her. She's not a thing," Wyatt said. "She's a mother. She's a wife. She's family." The rider spat into the dirt. "You don't get to decide what she is." "I just did." The rider's hand twitched, not toward a weapon, toward something heavier. A truth too hard to lift. "You'll regret this," he said. "Already have," Wyatt replied. "But I won't regret protecting her." The rider turned without another word. As Wyatt walked back to the house, he saw it. Movement on the flanks. 3 riders circling east. 2 more dropping behind the southern ridge. They weren't bluffing. They were preparing. He slammed the door. Behind him. "They're coming." Clara was already strapping Mercy into the sling. June handed her a bag, loaded with food, water, cloth. "I'm not leaving," Clara said. "You have to," Wyatt said. "We can't fight and protect you at once." Clara stood tall. "You gave me a home. I won't run from it." Wyatt grabbed her by the shoulders, his voice rough. "This isn't about pride. This is about her. That child. If they get through us." Clara lifted her chin. "Then they'll find me with a knife in my hand and my baby behind me." He stared at her, and in that moment he saw everything he didn't know he needed: fire, grace, defiance, and love. Not gentle love, fierce love. The kind that built nations and burned down empires. "All right," he said. "Then we fight together." They set their positions. Mason in the barn loft, rifle across the hay bales. Ruth in the kitchen with the lantern oil bombs. June and Wyatt at the front and back doors. Clara on the stairs, watching both the child and the hallway with a pistol clenched in her good hand. The first gunshot cracked just after sundown. Mason dropped a rider before his horse cleared the fence. The second and third fell in the same breath. Then, the air lit up. Bullets punched through walls like angry bees. Glass shattered. Horses screamed. Men yelled. Not words, just sounds. Rage and desperation mashed into breath. The hollow suns swarmed from every side, ropes and fire in their hands. But the family held. Ruth tossed oil bombs through the kitchen window, flames blooming in the yard. June shot a man clean off his saddle. Wyatt took down 2 more with calm, calculated shots that never missed. Clara shielded Mercy with her body and whispered psalms until her voice cracked. The barn caught fire first. Mason yelled from above, coughing, forced to abandon his perch. He leapt from the loft into a pile of hay, rolling, rifle still tight in his arms. 2 riders chased him. One fell to Wyatt's bullet. The other was met by June's blade at the door. They fought until the air stank of smoke and metal. Then came the scream. From the upstairs window. "Ruth!" "They've got the back gate." Wyatt turned in time to see 2 hollow sons pulling the hinges off the cellar door. One got inside. Clara ran. Down the stairs, into the dark. Baby in arms, she leapt over the broken steps and into the cellar just as the man reached for Mercy. She screamed. Not a word, not a cry, just a sound that came from somewhere primal. She bit. Her teeth sank into his neck and he staggered, dropping his blade. She stabbed him with his own knife. 3 times. When Wyatt found her minutes later, she was still shaking. Mercy pressed too. Her chest, her own face soaked in sweat and blood. "Is she okay?" he asked. Clara nodded. She didn't even cry. Above them, the chaos was breaking. More flames, more thunder, but fewer riders, fewer shadows. Then, quiet. Not peace, not yet, just the absence of attack. Wyatt climbed to the roof with his rifle scanning the tree line. No more movement. The hollow sons were gone. Or dead. He came down and found Mason in the barn ruins, pulling the saddle off a half-burned horse. Ruth was at the well, bucket in hand, dousing smoldering planks. June sat on the porch steps, gun in lap, blood on her shirt, not hers. Clara rocked Mercy beneath the stars, and in the space between breaths they counted. 1, 2, 3. All alive, the bodies of the hollow sons were dragged into a pile and burned. Wyatt dug no graves this time. Some men didn't earn dirt. At dawn, Mays arrived. He rode fast and brought 7 deputies. But the fight was over. Wyatt met him at the gate. "Too late," Wyatt said. Mays took off his hat, looked at the ashes. "You held 'em. We bled 'em. I'll send a wagon, supplies, medicine." Wyatt nodded, but his eyes were on the house where Clara stood, in the doorway with Mercy on her hip. Mays followed his gaze. "She yours?" Wyatt didn't answer. Mays smiled, tired. "She is now." When the sheriff left, Wyatt sat on the porch beside Clara. She leaned into him, her fingers brushing his. "I killed a man tonight," she whispered. "I know." I didn't feel sorry. He was quiet a long time. Then, "Some sins are written in ink, some in blood, some in protection. God sees the difference." Clara looked down at Mercy. "Do you think he forgives?" Wyatt kissed the top of her head. "I think he already has." They stayed like that until the sun burned gold across the horizon. No more screams. No more footsteps in the dark. No more debts to pay. Just a child asleep, a woman free, a man found, and a home rebuilt, not from wood or nails, but from everything they refused to lose. The land healed slower than their wounds. Rain came soft at first, washing the ashes into the soil, carrying the blood into roots and rocks where memory couldn't follow. What remained of the barn stood as a charred skeleton, and the smell of smoke lingered in the porch wood, but the house stood. So did the people inside it. Wyatt rebuilt by habit. His hands needed something to do, and hammering beams gave him peace. He rose early each morning, before the light reached the windows, and worked until his back ached. June worked beside him, quieter now, but strong. The fire had singed her, not broken her. She smiled more, even laughed once when Mason fell off the roof trying to hang a weather vane. Mason stayed on, said nothing about leaving. He didn't speak much about the night of the attack either. But some evenings he'd wander out to the tree where Clara had first been found. He'd sit there still, like the land was telling him something he couldn't quite hear yet. Ruth's hands trembled now when she read her Bible, but her voice never shook. She kept a rifle behind the kitchen door. Not out of fear, but reverence. Evil had come to their door, and she had lived to tell of it. That changed the way she prayed. And Clara had changed most of all, not outwardly. She still wore plain dresses, still braided her hair, still blushed when Wyatt stared too long. But something inside her had deepened. There was no more hesitation in her steps, no more fear in her voice. When she held Mercy now, it wasn't with the desperation of a girl trying to cling to something good. It was with the certainty of a woman who had earned everything in her arms. She moved through the house like someone who belonged. One afternoon, as the wind rustled through half-grown wheat, Clara found Wyatt behind the barn. He was mending the last gate, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt, his hat pushed low to shade his eyes. "Fence is nearly finished," she said, watching him. "2 more rails. You're not going to rest when it's done, are you?" Wyatt looked up, smiled faintly. "Probably not." Clara stepped closer. "You keep building things." "It's what I know." She took the hammer from his hand and set it down. "Maybe it's time to build something else." Wyatt stared at her, reading what she didn't say. Her eyes didn't falter, and neither did her meaning. That night they laid together in the quiet room, not out of pity, not because the house was safe, but because it was time. Clara wasn't a girl anymore, and Wyatt wasn't just a man with scars. He was hers, their hands fit without searching, their bodies folded together not with hunger, but with reverence. He kissed her softly at first, then deeper, each touch unearthing something buried under years of silence and survival. When it was over, she cried, not out of shame, but release. He held her and whispered nothing. Just let the warmth between them say all the things the years had taken away. Later, she turned to him in the dark. "Did you ever think you'd get this?" Wyatt traced the curve of her hip. "No. Me neither. They married in spring. Nothing fancy. No preacher. Just Ruth reading scripture under the porch awning while the wind rolled through the high grass. June gave Clara a ribbon for her hair. Mason gave Wyatt a proper saddle. And Mercy, now walking on unsteady legs, gave them both a future. They planted wildflowers on the tree where she'd been found, yellow and white and pale blue. For remembrance. For beginnings. Weeks turned to months. The wheat ripened golden. Rain came when it needed to. Mercy grew teeth and a temper. Clara sang in the mornings, and Wyatt whistled again for the first time in years. At night, they read aloud while June mended things and Mason carved new fence posts just to stay busy. One day, a traveler came down the trail, an old man with a bent back and a limp. He asked for water. Clara brought him a glass. He paused before leaving. This place was cursed once, years back. Wyatt leaned on the porch rail. It isn't anymore. The man nodded slowly. No, I can see that. When he rode off, Clara turned to Wyatt. Were we cursed? Wyatt didn't answer right away. Then he said, I think we were just waiting for something to break the silence. She smiled. I did. You did, he agreed, pulling her close, loud as thunder. One stormy night, Wyatt woke to crying. Not Mercy. Clara. He found her sitting in the kitchen, staring out the window, a letter in her hand. He sat beside her, pulled the letter from her fingers. It was stained and torn. The seal was broken. The name at the bottom meant nothing to him. It's from my brother, Clara whispered. She hadn't spoken of family since the attack. He says my father died, that the farm is gone, that They don't know where I went, that he's sorry. Wyatt read the words. They were clumsy, regret tangled in too much pride. Not a confession, not quite forgiveness. What do you want to do? He asked. Clara looked down the hall where Mercy slept. I want to stay, she said. So they burned the letter together in the hearth. Years passed. The ranch became a kind of legend. Folks spoke of it in whispers and awe. Not just because of the fight, or the hollow suns, or the fire, but because something rare had taken root there. Not power, not wealth. Love. Real love, forged in blood and choices and sacrifice. The kind of love people chase their whole lives and never find. The kind that made enemies turn back and made broken women walk tall, and Mercy grew. She had Wyatt's calm eyes and Clara's stormy laugh. She was brave and stubborn and smarter than she had any right to be. She asked questions that made grown men pause, and one day she told Ruth she wanted to be a preacher. I want to talk to God the way Mama does. Ruth smiled. Then you already do. One morning, as Wyatt watched the sun rise from the back porch, Mercy crawled into his lap and asked, Where do we go when we die? He looked out at the sky, pale with new light. We go home. She frowned. But we're already home. He kissed the top of her head. That's the best kind. Later, that day, Mason packed his things. He came to Wyatt, saddlebags slung over his shoulder. Time for me to head out. Wyatt nodded. Where to? Don't know yet. But it's time. They shook hands. Clara hugged him. Mercy gave him a painted stone. This is for your new home, she said. Mason smiled. Guess I have one now. He left before sunset. Clara watched him go, her hand in Wyatt's. You think he'll come back? He's family, Wyatt said. He never left. Years later, when Wyatt's hair turned silver and Clara's steps slowed, Mercy stood tall enough to ride a horse alone. She wore boots too big and spoke with conviction. June had taught her how to shoot. Ruth had taught her how to pray. Clara had taught her how to fight. And Wyatt had taught her how to stand. The world outside their fence still turned mean. But inside, it was quiet. It was whole. One evening, Wyatt sat on the porch alone. The sky was red. The air warm. He closed his eyes. He remembered dust and blood. He remembered a girl beneath a tree. He remembered silence that weighed like a tomb. And now, laughter inside the house, a cradle rocking, dinner on the stove. He opened his eyes and smiled. Because he'd found more than a family. He'd found home.